Henry's hands trembled as he stared at the disassembled $1.5 million Harley engine scattered across his garage floor. 50 master mechanics had failed, and the Hells Angels were running out of patience. Then a scrawny, homeless kid no older than 14 appeared in his doorway, dirt-streaked fingers reaching for the titanium components. "If you permit me, I will fix this," John whispered, and Henry's blood ran cold. Because either this boy was about to save his reputation, or he'd just invited a thief into the one place the club would never forgive him for compromising. What Henry didn't know was that John's secret would change everything. Welcome to Hells Angels family. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now because this story will touch your heart in ways you won't expect. To my faithful subscribers who've been here from the beginning, may God continue to bless you abundantly. Before we dive in, let's lift this moment up in prayer. Heavenly Father, I come before you asking for your divine protection over everyone watching right now. Bless their families, Lord. Heal their bodies, provide for their needs, and give them peace that surpasses all understanding. Surround them with your favor, and let your presence be felt in their lives today. In Jesus' mighty name, amen. Now, what you're about to witness isn't just a story about fixing a broken engine. It's about a homeless 14-year-old boy named John whose courage exposed a deadly conspiracy, and a biker named Henry who risked everything to protect him when powerful men wanted them both silenced. Henry's wrench slipped from his oil-stained fingers and clattered against the concrete floor of his Oakland garage, the metallic echo swallowed by the roar of rain hammering against the steel roof like 1,000 angry fists demanding entry. 3 months, 50 master mechanics. One impossible deadline that expired in 72 hours. He stared at the scattered components of the $1.5 million Harley engine spread across his custom-built workbench like the dissected remains of a dream that had metastasized into his worst nightmare. The aerospace-grade titanium gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, each component machined to tolerances measured in microns, mocking him with its perfection. Because something this beautiful, this precisely engineered, this impossibly expensive shouldn't be this catastrophically broken. His phone buzzed for the 18th time that evening, the vibration making it dance across the grease-stained surface of his secondary workstation. Another text from Reaper, the Hells Angels Oakland chapter president, each message shorter and colder than the last. Status? That single word carried the weight of 15 years of brotherhood. 15 years of loyalty earned through blood and sacrifice, 15 years of reputation that could evaporate like morning fog if Henry couldn't resurrect this machine by Friday midnight. The club's entire reputation was built on dominance and precision. They were the kings of California's motorcycle culture, feared and respected from San Diego to the Oregon border. This engine was supposed to be their crown jewel, their declaration to the world that the Hells Angels could compete with any custom shop in America, from Detroit's legacy builders who'd been crafting machines for 3 generations to Los Angeles' celebrity mechanics who charged rock stars and tech billionaires $250,000 just for consultation fees. But the engine had other plans. It had systematically humiliated specialists who'd worked on bikes worth millions, confused diagnostics experts who could identify microscopic problems with equipment that cost more than most people's houses, and utterly defeated engineers who designed propulsion systems for SpaceX and Boeing's classified military projects. Henry had watched 50 men fail over the past 90 days. Each one arriving with confidence bordering on arrogance. Each one leaving with their reputation slightly tarnished and their theories shattered against the inexplicable reality of this machine's refusal to function. They'd used thermal imaging cameras that cost $60,000. They'd employed AI-assisted diagnostic software that NASA used for Mars rover troubleshooting. They'd brought in metallurgists who could analyze molecular bonds and identify stress fractures invisible to the human eye. Nothing worked. The engine remained stubbornly, mysteriously, impossibly broken. The garage itself reflected Henry's 15-year journey with the club. Walls covered in vintage motorcycle posters from the 1960s when the Hells Angels first roared into American consciousness. Tool chests worth more than luxury sedans. a lift system that could handle bikes up to 2,000 pounds, and security cameras with facial recognition technology that would make most corporate offices jealous. This wasn't just a workspace. It was Henry's sanctuary, his proof that a kid from Oakland's roughest neighborhood could build something meaningful with his hands and his loyalty to the brotherhood. The garage door rattled violently, metal grinding against metal as wind drove rain through every crack in the structure with the persistence of water seeking any weakness. Henry's hand instinctively moved to the 9mm Glock in his workbench drawer. You didn't survive as a Hell's Angel in Oakland without assuming every unexpected sound was a potential threat, whether from rival clubs, desperate criminals, or federal agents looking for any excuse to dismantle what took decades to build. His fingers wrapped around the familiar grip, muscle memory from countless hours at the range taking over as he positioned himself with the workbench between him and the side entrance. But when the side door creaked open, protesting on hinges that needed oil, what stumbled through wasn't a rival gang member sizing up the competition or a desperate thief searching for quick flip tools. It was a kid, a bone-thin, rain-soaked kid who looked like he'd been living in clothes donated from a dumpster 3 seasons ago and worn continuously ever since. His jeans hung from jutting hip bones, held up by a belt with new holes punched through worn leather. His jacket, once probably blue, now faded to an indeterminate gray, was too large by several sizes, sleeves covering hands that clutched something against his chest like a drowning man gripping driftwood. "Get out," Henry barked, his voice carrying the authority of 15 years enforcing club business, his hand tightening around the pistol grip. "This is private property. You've got 5 seconds before this becomes a problem for both of us." The boy didn't run, didn't even flinch at the implied threat. He just stood there in the doorway, water streaming from his matted brown hair and rivulets that traced the sharp angles of malnutrition in his face, sneakers held together with what looked like duct tape and pure stubbornness, soles separating from uppers in ways that must make every step a small act of determination. But it was his eyes that made Henry's trigger finger hesitate. Sharp and impossibly focused for someone who couldn't be older than 14, studying the disassembled engine on the workbench with an intensity that suggested recognition rather than curiosity. "If you permit me, I will fix this," the kid whispered, his voice barely audible over the storm's fury. Not a question, not a plea. A statement delivered with the quiet confidence of someone who'd already calculated every variable, run the numbers in his head, and knew the answer with mathematical certainty. Henry laughed, the sound harsh and bitter in the cold garage air, echoing off walls that had witnessed countless repairs but never anything quite this absurd. "Kid, I've had 50 master mechanics look at that engine. Men with 40 years of experience. Men who've built bikes that sold for more than your entire neighborhood is worth. Men who trained at Harley-Davidson's headquarters in Milwaukee and worked in shops that service senators and celebrities. What makes you think?" Because they were looking for conventional problems, the boy interrupted, taking 3 measured steps closer to the workbench, his movements careful and deliberate like someone who'd learned to navigate hostile spaces without triggering defensive responses. His dirt-streaked fingers reached toward the titanium components with surgical precision, not touching but hovering millimeters above the metal, his eyes tracking invisible patterns that Henry couldn't perceive. But this isn't a conventional failure. The microfractures in the fuel injector housing are deliberately placed at stress points calculated to cause catastrophic cascade failure under specific temperature and pressure conditions that would only manifest after the engine reached operational parameters. Whoever sabotaged this engine understood aerospace engineering at a level most mechanics never encounter in their entire careers. They knew exactly how to make it fail in a way that would look like manufacturing defects rather than deliberate destruction. The words hit Henry like a physical blow, each technical term landing with precision that suggested education far beyond what someone living on Oakland streets should possess. Sabotage. The possibility had crossed his mind during desperate 3 a.m. spirals when sleep wouldn't come and paranoia whispered through the darkness. But hearing this homeless kid articulate it with technical precision that would impress NASA engineers made his blood run cold. "Who the hell are you?" The boy pulled a worn notebook from inside his soaked jacket. Pages warped from water damage and street life, edges frayed, and cover held together with what looked like electrical tape. When he opened it, Henry glimpsed pages covered in mechanical diagrams that looked like they belonged in classified engineering documents rather than a 14-year-old's possession. Complex equations, stress analysis charts, thermodynamics calculations. "My name is John, and I've been watching your garage for 3 weeks, studying your security patterns, learning your schedule, waiting for the exact right moment to offer my help when you'd be desperate enough to listen." Red flags exploded across Henry's consciousness like fireworks in his peripheral vision. A homeless kid watching his garage for weeks, knowing details about the engine that even the Hells Angels' inner circle barely understood, speaking in technical language that suggested advanced education in aerospace engineering, having diagrams that looked like proprietary designs worth millions in intellectual property. Either this was the most elaborate setup Henry had ever encountered. Maybe federal agents had gotten creative with their infiltration tactics, or something far stranger and more dangerous was happening. "You've got 30 seconds to explain why I shouldn't throw you back into that storm," Henry said, his hand moving closer to the Glock, thumb instinctively finding the safety. "And why you know so damn much about an engine that's been locked in this garage since Derek personally delivered it 3 months ago. Start talking, and make it convincing." John's fingers traced the air above a titanium component with the reverence of someone handling sacred objects, his eyes distant like he was seeing something beyond the physical metal, memories perhaps, or connections invisible to anyone else. "Because I recognized the engineering signature, the way the stress calculations were performed, the specific microtolerances that only one person in the world would design exactly this way, the thermal management philosophy, the fuel injection timing algorithms." He looked up, and Henry saw something devastating in those young eyes, grief mixed with desperate hope and rage that had been simmering for years. "My father built engines like this before he disappeared 3 years ago, before someone made him vanish because he knew too much about what the wrong people were planning to do with his designs, before they decided his knowledge was more dangerous than valuable." The garage suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in as Henry's mind raced through implications that branched into increasingly dark possibilities. A missing aerospace engineer, a sabotage prototype engine worth more than most houses, a kid with knowledge that could either save Henry's reputation or destroy everything the Hells Angels had built over decades. Outside, the rain hammered harder against the roof, nature itself demanding a decision that would alter the trajectory of multiple lives. Subscribe and comment where you're watching from. We're building a community that never misses these stories. "Let me see the fuel injection system," John said quietly, already moving toward the workbench like he'd been working in this garage his entire life, his movements suggesting muscle memory that contradicted his apparent homelessness. His hands moved with practiced efficiency despite their dirt and trembling, identifying components faster than men with decades of experience, knowing instinctively which tools to reach for without asking. "I can prove what I'm saying. Give me 10 minutes with your diagnostic equipment, and I'll show you exactly where the sabotage occurred, how they masked it from standard detection methods, and why every mechanic who looked at this engine was systematically misdirected toward the wrong components." Henry's phone buzzed again, the vibration angry and insistent. "Reaper, we need to talk about alternatives." Translation clear as gunfire. "We're considering what happens when you fail." The Brotherhood didn't tolerate failure, especially not failure that cost them millions in investment capital and damaged their reputation with custom builders across the country. Henry thought about his options, each one worse than the last. Trust a mysterious homeless kid who somehow possessed classified details about an engine that had defeated 50 experts with credentials and decades of experience. Or face the Brotherhood's judgment when Friday arrived without a functioning prototype. Judgment that could mean anything from demotion to permanent exile to solutions more final. "Touch anything without my explicit permission, and this ends badly for you," Henry warned, lowering the Glock, but keeping it within easy reach on the workbench, positioned where one quick motion would bring it back into play. He watched as John's hands moved across the components with reverence that bordered on religious devotion, noting patterns invisible to Henry's trained eye, measuring gaps with nothing but visual assessment, and that worn notebook filled with diagrams that looked increasingly legitimate the longer Henry studied them. The kid worked with the confidence of someone who'd done this before, who understood these systems at a fundamental level that transcended memorization and touched something closer to intuition. 20 minutes passed in tense silence, broken only by Rain's percussion and John's occasional muttered observations. Fragments of technical analysis spoken too quietly for Henry to catch completely, but laden with certainty that suggested real understanding rather than performance. The kid pulled out a cheap multimeter from his jacket pocket, testing electrical continuity across specific pathways, nodding to himself when readings confirmed whatever hypotheses he'd formed. He used Henry's diagnostic laptop without asking permission, navigating through software interfaces like he'd designed them himself, pulling up data logs that even the previous mechanics hadn't thought to examine. Then John straightened abruptly, his face draining of color, fingers trembling as they hovered over a specific section of the engine's computer housing, the sealed module that controlled fuel injection timing and combustion sequencing. "Your club member who delivered this engine 3 months ago," John said slowly, each word measured and careful, voice tight with emotion he was struggling to contain. "The man who handed it over personally and made sure you understood how valuable it was. The one who told you this would revolutionize the club's reputation. Did he wear a silver scorpion ring on his right hand? Custom made, probably Italian silver, with the scorpion's tail wrapping around toward the palm." The question detonated like a fragmentation grenade in Henry's chest, shrapnel of implication tearing through everything he thought he understood about the past 3 months. Nobody outside the Hells Angels knew about Derek's signature ring. The silver scorpion was his personal symbol, earned through actions Henry didn't like to remember but respected for their necessity in protecting the Brotherhood. Nobody outside the inner circle knew Derek had personally transported this engine from the custom shop in Los Angeles, making the 12-hour round trip himself despite having prospects who could have handled the delivery. This homeless kid shouldn't know Derek existed, let alone details about jewelry that identified him as one of the Brotherhood's most trusted members, someone Henry had known for 8 years and considered closer than blood family. "How do you know about that ring?" Henry's voice came out dangerous and low, the tone that preceded violence in negotiations gone wrong. His hand drifted back toward the Glock because this conversation had just crossed from suspicious into territory that suggested threats he couldn't yet define. John didn't answer immediately. Instead, his shaking hands reached back into his jacket, fumbling through inner pockets with the desperation of someone about to reveal something that couldn't be taken back. He pulled out something that made Henry's world tilt sideways on an axis he hadn't known existed. A photograph. Creased and water-damaged, but unmistakable in its subject matter. It showed Derek, silver scorpion ring clearly visible on his raised right hand, standing beside an older Asian man in what looked like an aerospace engineering lab filled with equipment Henry recognized from documentaries about NASA facilities. Both men were smiling, arms around each other's shoulders like old friends sharing a secret, their body language suggesting comfort and familiarity that came from significant time spent together. "Because," John whispered, his voice breaking with emotion Henry suddenly understood was grief mixed with rage that had been festering for 3 years. "That's my father standing next to your brother." This picture was taken 6 weeks before the engine mysteriously malfunctioned. 6 weeks before my father vanished and left me alone on these streets with nothing but his notebooks and warnings I was too young to understand. And if you look at the background of this photo carefully, you'll see something that proves everything I've told you is true, and that you're in far more danger than you realize. Henry grabbed the photograph with more force than necessary, his eyes scanning the background details John indicated with a trembling finger. There, partially visible on a large whiteboard behind the 2 men, were technical specifications and design notes rendered in precise engineering notation. For this exact engine, he recognized the serial number prefix and dimensional specifications. But what froze his blood completely, what made his 15 years of tactical training scream warnings through his nervous system, was the handwritten message scrawled in red marker at the top of the board, barely legible in the photo, but unmistakable once you knew to look. Do not trust internal transfer protocols. Design theft confirmed. Notify FBI if compromised. The garage seemed to spin as reality reconstructed itself around this new, terrifying information that shattered everything Henry thought he knew about the past 3 months. Derek wasn't just a delivery man doing the club a favor. He was personally connected to John's missing father in ways that suggested conspiracy rather than coincidence. The engine failure wasn't random mechanical malfunction or manufacturing defects. It was deliberate sabotage executed by someone inside the Brotherhood itself, someone Henry had trusted with his life on multiple occasions. And this homeless kid standing in his garage wasn't making desperate claims or running elaborate cons. He was offering evidence of a conspiracy that could tear the Hell's Angels apart from within, that could bring federal attention down on operations that had stayed safely hidden for decades. Who else knows about this photograph? Henry demanded, his tactical mind already calculating threats, responses, and contingencies that branched into increasingly violent scenarios. Who else has seen what you're showing me? Did you make copies? Upload it anywhere? Show it to anyone on the streets? John's eyes met his with an intensity that suggested understanding of exactly how dangerous this moment was. Nobody. Because everyone who knew the truth is either dead or disappeared, and I learned fast that asking questions made people nervous. My mother died in a car accident 2 months after my father vanished. Brakes failed on a highway she drove every day for 10 years. The federal agent my father trusted had a heart attack at 42 with no history of heart disease. The private investigator I tried to hire took my last $50 and I never saw him again. Except you. And now me. Which is why I waited 3 weeks to approach you specifically, watching every person who entered this garage, studying every interaction, because my father's final message, the one he left encrypted in his notebooks using codes only I would understand, said you were the only one in the club who could be trusted. The only one who wasn't part of whatever Derek is planning. The only Hell's Angel who still believed the Brotherhood meant something beyond profit. Thunder crashed overhead with enough force to rattle tools on their magnetic strips, and Henry's phone exploded with an incoming call that lit up the screen like an accusation. Reaper, demanding updates. Demanding answers that Henry suddenly realized he couldn't provide without revealing information that would put both him and John in immediate mortal danger. Demanding results by Friday midnight or else. Or else that suddenly seemed connected to plans far more complex than Henry had imagined. But as Henry stared at the photograph in his hands, at Derek's smiling face and the Asian man John claimed was his father, at the engineering diagrams and warnings visible in the background, he realized the 72-hour deadline was the absolute least of his problems. Because if a 14-year-old homeless kid was telling the truth, if Derek had been orchestrating something that required making an aerospace engineer disappear and sabotaging a multi-million-dollar prototype, then Henry had just invited the only living witness to a conspiracy into his garage. And whoever was behind John's father's disappearance would do absolutely anything to make sure that witness never had the chance to tell anyone else what he knew. The Glock suddenly felt inadequate against threats that included people he'd called brothers for nearly a decade. And the rain hammering against the roof sounded less like weather and more like the countdown clock to decisions that would determine whether either of them survived the week. Henry let the phone ring through to voicemail. Reaper's call dying into silence that felt heavier than the thunder outside. His eyes stayed locked on the photograph, on details he'd missed during the first shock of recognition. The timestamp visible on a digital clock in the background, March 15th, 3 years and 2 months ago. The engineering equipment surrounding Derek and John's father suggested a facility far more sophisticated than any motorcycle shop Henry knew. This was corporate-level research and development, the kind of place that required security clearances and non-disclosure agreements thick enough to choke on. "Your father," Henry said carefully, setting the photograph on the workbench between them like evidence at a crime scene. "What was his name?" "His real name, not just Marcus Chun that you mentioned in passing." "Dr. Marcus Chun," John replied, pulling the worn notebook closer to his chest like a shield. He held 3 patents in aerospace propulsion systems before he started consulting privately. He worked for Lockheed Martin for 8 years, then Boeing for another 4, before he decided corporate restrictions were limiting what he could create. That's when he started taking private contracts, building custom engines for clients who wanted performance that exceeded anything available commercially. The Hells Angels approached him 18 months before he disappeared, offered him $2 million to design something revolutionary. Henry's stomach dropped as pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. $2 million. The club had mentioned a special investment 2 years ago, funds redirected from their legitimate businesses into what Reaper called future positioning. Henry had assumed it meant real estate or political connections, the kind of infrastructure investments that kept law enforcement at arm's length. He'd never questioned where the money actually went because questioning the president's decisions was a fast track to problems nobody wanted. "The Propulsion X system," John continued, his fingers trembling as they opened the notebook to pages covered in technical specifications that made Henry's head spin. "That's what my father called it. An engine that could generate 30% more power while using 15% less fuel, with emissions so clean it would pass California's strictest environmental standards. He designed it specifically for high-performance motorcycles, but the applications extended far beyond that: military vehicles, generators for remote operations, even prototype drone systems. The technology was worth hundreds of millions if properly licensed and marketed. But your father disappeared before completing it," Henry said, his tactical mind already racing ahead to implications that grew darker with each connection. "Which means somebody got nervous about sharing the profits. Or somebody realized they could steal the designs and sell them independently." John nodded, his jaw clenching with anger that had probably kept him alive on Oakland's brutal streets for 3 years. Derek wasn't just delivering an engine 3 months ago. He was testing whether my father's final prototype actually worked after all this time. My father built 3 versions. The first 2 had deliberate flaws built in, insurance policies in case someone tried to steal his work before he got paid. This engine you have, it's the 3rd version, the real one, the one worth killing for. The garage felt smaller with each revelation, walls closing in as Henry understood exactly how much danger he'd been working with for 90 days without realizing it. 50 mechanics hadn't been allowed to fix the engine. They'd been kept away from success by someone who needed the prototype to remain broken until the right moment. Until whatever Derek was planning reached its final stage. "Show me," Henry demanded, gesturing at the disassembled components. "If you really understand this system the way you claim, prove it. Show me the sabotage your father's work taught you to recognize." John moved to the workbench with purpose that contradicted his malnourished frame, his hands steady now that they had permission to work. He picked up the fuel injection housing, the component that had confused the most experts, turning it under the fluorescent lights at angles that caught microscopic details. "See these stress fractures along the intake manifold? They're not random. They're laser cut with precision that requires equipment worth $500,000. The kind of equipment only available in specialized aerospace facilities or military contractors. Someone made this engine fail in a way that would look like manufacturing defects, but timed to trigger after specific operational hours." Henry leaned closer, seeing what John described once it was pointed out: patterns too regular to be natural wear, too precise to be accidents. His phone buzzed again with a text. "Derek this time. Heard you're still struggling. Need me to come by and take another look?" The message that would have seemed helpful 5 minutes ago now read like a threat wrapped in friendly concern. "How long to fix it?" Henry asked, his mind already calculating timelines and risks. 6 hours if I work straight through," John replied, already reaching for tools. "But there's something else you need to understand. My father didn't just disappear because of the engine design. He discovered that Derek was planning to sell the Propulsion X system to someone outside the Hells Angels, a criminal organization in Chicago that specializes in technology theft and resale to international buyers. Russian oligarchs, Chinese military contractors, Middle Eastern groups that don't care about American export restrictions. My father tried to warn your president, tried to explain that Derek was committing treason against the Brotherhood for profit. And Reaper didn't listen. Henry finished, pieces assembling into a picture that explained 3 years of questions he'd never thought to ask. Because Derek convinced him the accusations were crazy? Or because Reaper is part of it? John interrupted, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. That's what my father's final encrypted message said. Derek isn't working alone. He has protection from the top, which means the entire conspiracy goes higher than anyone realizes. That's why my father ran instead of fighting. He knew trying to expose Derek meant going against the entire Oakland chapter leadership. If this story matters to you, like and subscribe. We lose everything without your support. The implications crash through Henry's understanding of everything he'd built his adult life around. The brotherhood he bled for. The loyalty he'd demonstrated through actions that kept him awake some nights. The president he'd followed without question for 8 years. All of it potentially compromised by greed that put profit above the codes that supposedly defined what it meant to wear the Hells Angels patches. Thunder cracked directly overhead, close enough to make both of them flinch. John's hands moved across the engine components with increasing speed, making adjustments that Henry couldn't follow but recognized as purposeful. The kid worked like someone racing against a deadline only he could see, occasionally consulting his father's notebook, muttering calculations under his breath that included numbers Henry's education couldn't parse. When my mother died, John said quietly, not looking up from his work, the police called it an accident. Brake line failure on her 10-year-old Honda. But I found the maintenance records she kept. She'd replaced those brake lines 6 months earlier. My father taught me enough about mechanical systems to recognize when something doesn't add up. Someone cut her brake line and made it look like corrosion. Someone who knew she'd been asking questions about where her husband went. Henry felt sick. Not the surface nausea of bad food or too much alcohol, but the deep, existential sickness that came from realizing everything you believed was built on foundations of sand. If Derek could make an aerospace engineer vanish, if he could arrange an accident that killed a woman who asked too many questions, then what else had happened over the past 3 years that Henry had accepted as coincidence or bad luck? How many other deaths or disappearances might connect back to whatever conspiracy had been unfolding right under his nose? Almost done, John muttered, his fingers flying across the engine's computer interface, entering codes that reprogrammed the fuel injection timing. Just need to reset the diagnostic parameters, and he stopped mid-sentence, froze completely, his finger hovering over the keyboard, eyes locked on something on the diagnostic screen that Henry couldn't see from his angle. The color drained from John's face in a way that made Henry's hand instinctively move toward the Glock. What? Henry demanded. What did you find? John's voice came out as a strangled whisper, terror replacing the confident competence he'd shown for the past hour. Someone's been in this garage recently. Within the past 48 hours. They accessed your security system using administrator credentials that shouldn't exist. There's a ghost account in the network logs that's been watching your camera feeds and sending data to an external server. His hands started shaking violently as he pulled up additional screens. They deleted footage. Specific sections from the past week. Times when I was watching the garage from across the street, planning when to approach you. Henry's blood turned to ice water. Meaning what? John turned to face him, and Henry saw genuine fear in those 14-year-old eyes, the kind of fear that came from understanding predators were already circling, meaning they knew I was coming tonight. They watched me arrive. They're probably watching us right now through your own security cameras. And whoever hacked your system didn't just delete evidence. His voice dropped to barely audible. They uploaded something. A remote access package that gives them control over every electronic system in this garage, including your security doors, your lights, Everything. The overhead fluorescence flickered once, twice. Then the entire garage plunged into absolute darkness as every electrical system shut down simultaneously, leaving them blind and vulnerable in the storm's fury. Darkness swallowed the garage completely, the sudden absence of fluorescent lights leaving Henry's eyes useless in the blackness. Rain hammered against the steel roof with renewed violence, masking any sounds of movement or approach. His hand found the Glock by muscle memory, fingers sliding along the frame to the trigger guard while his other hand grabbed John's jacket sleeve to maintain contact with the only other person he currently trusted in this building. "Don't move," Henry whispered, his voice barely audible over the storm. His mind raced through the garage's layout, calculating distances to exits, cover positions, and defensive advantages that evaporated when you couldn't see your own hands. Whoever controlled the electrical systems could be watching them right now through night vision equipment, could have people moving into position while Henry stood blind and vulnerable. A scraping sound came from the direction of the main garage door, metal on metal, deliberate and slow. Someone was opening it manually, bypassing the electronic controls that had been shut down. Henry pulled John backward toward the rear storage area, his free hand sweeping ahead to avoid obstacles he knew were there but couldn't see. His shin connected with something hard, a toolbox he'd forgotten to put away, and the resulting clatter sounded like gunshots in the enclosed space. "The engine," John hissed urgently. "We can't leave it. If they get the prototype, everything my father died protecting." "Your father's already gone." Henry cut him off, tactical priorities overriding sentiment. "You're alive, and staying that way matters more than metal. Move." But John twisted free from Henry's grip with surprising strength, his footsteps heading back toward the workbench rather than the exit. Henry cursed under his breath, following the sound while his eyes slowly adjusted to the minimal light seeping through gaps in the garage door. Shadows took shape. The workbench, scattered tools, and John's thin silhouette bent over the engine components with frantic purpose. 30 seconds, John muttered, his hands moving across the engine with the confidence of someone who'd memorized its layout. "I just need 30 seconds to pull the computer module. It has evidence we can't replace. The tracking software, the sabotage programming, everything." The garage door stopped moving, leaving a gap wide enough for someone to slip through. Henry positioned himself between John and the entrance, the Glock raised and ready, even though identifying targets in this darkness meant waiting until they were dangerously close. His heart hammered against his ribs, adrenaline sharpening his senses to compensate for his useless eyes. He heard John's quiet grunts of effort, metal scraping against metal as components were disconnected, the soft thud of something being shoved into the kid's jacket. Then the backup generator kicked on. Not Henry's generator, which sat silent and useless, but a portable unit whose mechanical growl came from just outside the garage. Emergency lights blazed to life, battery-powered LEDs that someone had installed while Henry was distracted. The sudden illumination revealed 3 men standing inside the garage entrance, and Henry's stomach dropped when he recognized the one in front. Derek stood with casual confidence, his silver scorpion ring catching the harsh LED light as he held a tablet displaying what looked like Henry's own security feeds. "That's far enough, brother," Derek said, his voice carrying the friendly tone of someone greeting an old friend rather than someone who'd just orchestrated a hostile takeover of Henry's private space. "Nobody needs to do anything stupid tonight. We're all on the same side here." "The hell we are," Henry growled, the Glock centered on Derek's chest. The 2 men flanking him were prospects Henry recognized, Marcus and Tommy, both eager to prove themselves worthy of full patches, both clearly following Derek's orders over anyone else's. They held weapons but kept them lowered, probably under instructions to avoid escalating unless necessary. Derek's eyes shifted to John, who'd frozen at the workbench with his hands still inside the engine compartment. "There's the boy who's been causing problems. You know, kid, your father would be disappointed. He always talked about loyalty, about honoring agreements. Then he tried to back out of our arrangement when he realized how profitable his designs could be. You killed him, John said, his voice steady despite the fear Henry could see in his rigid posture. You made him disappear because he wouldn't let you steal his work. Disappeared, not killed, Derek corrected with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Important distinction. Your father made choices that required him to step away from his old life. Witness protection has nothing on what we arranged for him. New identity, new country, enough money to live comfortably if he kept his mouth shut about proprietary information that technically belonged to us through contract law. Henry's grip tightened on the Glock, his mind racing through the implications. If Marcus Chun was alive, it changed everything. It also made Derek's story suspect. Why would a man in comfortable exile leave his 14-year-old son to survive alone on brutal streets? Why abandon the kid to 3 years of homelessness and danger? You're lying, John said, echoing Henry's thoughts. My father would never leave me. Never. Whatever arrangement you claim to have made, he wouldn't agree to it if it meant abandoning his child. Derek shrugged, the gesture maddeningly casual. Believe what you want. But here's the reality. That engine you're standing over is club property, purchased with club money through contracts your father signed. The Propulsion X system belongs to the Hells Angels, and by extension, belongs to whoever the club designates to manage it, which happens to be me. His eyes shifted to Henry. This doesn't have to be complicated. Give me the engine, give me the kid, and we can all walk away from this mess. You can even keep your reputation intact. Tell Reaper the prototype got fixed, collect your credit, stay in good standing. And John? Henry asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear Derek say it out loud. Go somewhere safe where he can't cause problems asking questions about things that don't concern him anymore. Probably the same place his father went. New life, new name, better than living on streets eating from dumpsters. Derek's voice hardened slightly. But this is a one-time offer, Henry. Doors open for the next 60 seconds. Then things get messy in ways nobody wants. Like and subscribe now. Abandoned stories help no one, and we need you here. Henry's mind calculated odds and outcomes at lightning speed. 3 armed men versus 1, with a 14-year-old civilian in the crossfire. The garage offered limited cover and only 2 exits, both potentially monitored. Derek had clearly been planning this confrontation, had backup plans and resources Henry couldn't match alone. Every tactical assessment said surrender was the smart play. But something in John's posture, the way his hands remained motionless inside the engine compartment, the slight tension in his shoulders that suggested he wasn't frozen but waiting, made Henry hesitate. Time's up, Derek announced, raising his hand to signal the prospects forward. Last chance to do this easy. That's when John moved with speed that contradicted his malnourished frame, his hands emerging from the engine compartment, holding something small and metallic. Not the computer module Henry expected. Something else entirely, a rectangular object that reflected the emergency lights with an ominous gleam. Stop, John commanded, his voice carrying authority that made even Derek pause. Everyone stop moving, or I drop this titanium fuel cell directly onto your precious engine components. The chemical reaction will destroy everything. The Propulsion X design, the sabotage evidence, 3 years of your planning. All of it gone in a fire hot enough to melt steel. Henry couldn't see Derek's face clearly from his angle, but he saw the way the man's hand clenched around the tablet, knuckles whitening with tension. The prospects looked to Derek for guidance, uncertainty replacing their earlier confidence. You're bluffing, Derek said, but doubt crept into his voice. That fuel cell is inert without proper activation. John's hands shifted, and Henry heard a soft click, something mechanical engaging. My father taught me how to bypass safety protocols when I was 12 years old. Want to test whether I'm bluffing? The standoff stretched into seconds that felt like hours, everyone frozen in positions that could explode into violence with one wrong move. Henry's finger rested on the Glock's trigger, waiting for Derek's decision, praying this didn't end with a 14-year-old kid burning to death in a chemical fire. Then John's expression changed, confusion replacing defiance as his hands apparently felt something unexpected inside the engine compartment. His eyes widened with shock as he looked down, then back up at Henry with an expression that communicated both terror and desperate hope. "There's something else here," John whispered, his voice carrying in the sudden silence. "Hidden in the exhaust manifold. My father, he built a compartment I didn't know about. There's," his breath caught. "It's a USB drive. And a note. In his handwriting." Derek's composure cracked completely, his mask of casual confidence shattering into something far more dangerous. "Don't touch that," he snarled, lunging forward just as John's fingers closed around whatever he'd found. The note unfurled as John pulled his hand free, and Henry caught a glimpse of handwritten words that would change everything. "Henry, if you're reading this, you have 48 hours before they come for the boy." Derek's lunge toward John triggered chaos that erupted with the speed of violence long anticipated. Henry's training took over before conscious thought could interfere, his body moving on instinct honed through 15 years of street confrontations and club business that sometimes required physical enforcement. He fired a warning shot that punched through the steel roof, the gunshot's crack momentarily deafening in the enclosed space, forcing Derek to abort his attack and dive behind a tool chest for cover. John stumbled backward, the USB drive and handwritten note clutched against his chest like sacred relics, his eyes wild with the realization that whatever his father had hidden was valuable enough to make Derek abandon all pretense of friendly negotiation. The two prospects raised their weapons. A Sig Sauer and a Taurus that Henry recognized from the club's communal armory, but hesitated, caught between Derek's screamed orders and their training that said you didn't shoot a patched member without direct authorization from the president. "Stand down," Henry commanded, his voice carrying the authority of rank and years that these prospects couldn't match. "Nobody moves until we figure out what's on that drive. This is club business now, and club business requires the president's involvement before anyone starts shooting brothers." "That drive contains stolen property," Derek shouted from behind the tool chest, his carefully maintained composure completely shattered. "The kid's father violated his contract, hid proprietary information that belongs to the Hells Angels. We're not negotiating. Hand it over or this escalates in ways nobody survives." But Marcus, the taller prospect, lowered his weapon slightly, doubt creeping across his face. "Henry's right. We shouldn't be doing this without Reaper knowing. This feels wrong, man. We're pointing guns at a patched member over some computer files." "Shut up and follow orders," Derek snarled. But the crack in his authority was already spreading. Tommy kept his Taurus raised, but looked increasingly uncomfortable with the situation's trajectory. Henry seized the opening, his tactical mind recognizing opportunity in Derek's desperation. "John, get behind me. Derek, you and I are going to walk out of here together and take this directly to Reaper. Let him decide what happens to the drive and the kid. That's protocol. That's how the Brotherhood works. And that's the only way this ends without bodies that require explanations to law enforcement." For 3 seconds that stretched like hours, Derek's calculation was visible on his face. Weighing options, measuring odds, deciding whether to push this confrontation into gunfire or retreat into the procedural safety of club hierarchy. Henry watched Derek's eyes, reading the moment when desperation gave way to tactical thinking. "Fine," Derek said finally, straightening from behind the tool chest with his hands visible and empty. "We do this proper. Bring the drive to the clubhouse. Let Reaper review the contents. Make the call about what happens next. But the kid comes too. This involves his father's contracts, and he needs to answer for interfering in club business." Henry knew a trap when he heard one. Walking into the Hells Angels clubhouse with evidence that potentially implicated the chapter president meant walking into a kill box with no exits. But refusing meant immediate violence with uncertain outcomes and witnesses who would report whatever version of events Derek constructed afterward. "Deal," Henry lied smoothly, already planning the next 30 minutes. "Let us secure the engine components, grab proper clothes for the kid, and we'll head over together." Professional and proper. Derek studied him with suspicious eyes, but nodded slowly. "Marcus, Tommy, you two head back and inform Reaper we're incoming with sensitive materials. Henry and I will bring the boy in 20 minutes. Anyone tries to run, You notify the full chapter, and we handle it through official channels. The prospects filed out with visible relief at escaping the confrontation, their footsteps retreating toward motorcycles parked somewhere beyond the garage. The emergency lights cast harsh shadows across Derek's face as he leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching Henry and John with predatory patience. "Don't try anything clever," Derek warned. "I've got 3 more brothers parked 2 blocks away. You don't make it out of Oakland if this goes sideways." Henry moved deliberately, holstering the Glock and guiding John toward the rear storage area where he kept spare riding gear. His mind raced through scenarios and contingencies, calculating what the USB drive might contain that scared Derek enough to abandon years of careful planning. Once they were partially concealed behind storage shelves, Henry leaned close to John's ear. "Can you access that drive on a phone?" he whispered, his lips barely moving. Without him knowing, John's slight nod was almost imperceptible. His trembling fingers pulled a battered smartphone from his jacket pocket, the kind you could buy prepaid at gas stations for $40, probably his only possession worth protecting during 3 years on the streets. He connected the USB drive through an adapter while pretending to adjust his clothes, his body blocking Derek's view. The phone's screen illuminated with file directories that made John's breath catch. Henry glimpsed folder names before John angled the screen away. Transaction_records, communication_logs, witness_statements, Chun_disappearance_evidence. Dozens of files, maybe hundreds, organized with the methodical precision of someone building a prosecutable case. John opened a text file labeled read_first_Henry.txt, and both of them scanned the opening lines written in Marcus Chin's distinctive technical prose. "If you're reading this, my son survived long enough to find you. John, I'm sorry for everything you've endured. I thought disappearing would protect you, but I underestimated how ruthless they'd become. Henry, you're reading this because you're the only Hell's Angel who refused Derek's recruitment attempts. The only one who still believes the Brotherhood means something beyond profit. What follows will destroy everything you've built your life around. But it's the truth, and the truth is the only weapon my son has left. Like and subscribe. Every person who abandons this story makes the next chapter harder to tell." Henry's jaw clenched as John scrolled through the document, revealing details that turned his stomach. Transaction records showing Derek had sold Propulsion X design specifications to a technology broker in Chicago for $8 million, money that never touched Hell's Angels' accounts. Communication logs proving Derek had been coordinating with criminal organizations across 5 states, using the club's reputation as cover for industrial espionage that had nothing to do with brotherhood or loyalty. Witness statements from engineers who'd worked with Marcus Chun, each one mysteriously unavailable for follow-up, dead, disappeared, or suddenly unwilling to discuss their previous employer. But the section that made Henry's blood run cold was titled Reaper_involvement_proof. Bank records showing the chapter president had received monthly payments from Derek's offshore accounts for 2 years. Encrypted messages discussing the Chun problem and permanent solutions that predated Marcus Chin's disappearance by 3 weeks. Photographs taken secretly showing Reaper and Derek meeting with men Henry didn't recognize. Corporate types in expensive suits, the kind of people who bought stolen technology and didn't ask questions about where it originated. "Your mother," John whispered, his voice cracking as he found a subfolder labeled Collateral_Damages. Inside were maintenance records for her vehicle, showing professional brake line replacement 6 months before her death, followed by autopsy photos that proved the brake lines had been deliberately compromised with acid corrosion accelerated by chemical treatment, sophisticated enough to fool initial investigations, but obvious to anyone who knew what to look for. Derek's work. Reaper's authorization. The Brotherhood Henry had devoted 15 years to protecting was built on foundations that included murdering innocent women who asked too many questions about missing husbands. "We're not going to the clubhouse," Henry said quietly, his decision made. "We're running, right now, and we don't stop until we're somewhere these files can't be buried with our bodies." Touching, Derek's voice came from closer than Henry expected, the man having moved silently across the garage floor while they were distracted. His weapon was raised and centered on Henry's head. "But you're not going anywhere except where I tell you. Give me the drive and the phone, or I paint this storage area with your brains and tell Reaper you tried to steal club property. Your choice." Henry's hand moved toward his holstered Glock, but Derek's finger tightened on the trigger in warning. "Don't. You're good, Henry, but you're not faster than a bullet at this range. The kid can live if you cooperate. Make this easy." John's phone screen still displayed his mother's autopsy photos, evidence of Derek's capacity for murder dressed up as accident. The kid's hands shook violently, whether from fear or rage Henry couldn't determine, but something shifted in John's expression, something that looked like desperate calculation. "My father left one more thing," John said suddenly, his voice strange and distant. In his final video message, the one he recorded before disappearing, he said, "If I ever felt threatened with no escape, I should tell you exactly 7 words." His eyes met Henry's with intensity that communicated volumes. 7 specific words that would make you understand what needed to happen next. Derek's gun barrel never wavered, but confusion flickered across his face. "What are you talking about?" John's jaw clenched, and he spoke the 7 words with perfect clarity. "The federal raid happens at dawn tomorrow." The garage exploded with the sound of Derek's panicked cursing as he realized what those words meant. That Marcus Chin hadn't just documented Derek's crimes. He'd apparently given that documentation to federal authorities. That somewhere in the files on that USB drive was evidence that FBI agents were already building a case. That dawn was less than 7 hours away, and Derek's time had run out. But what froze everyone in place was the sound that followed John's declaration. The distinctive mechanical chunk of a shotgun being racked, coming from the garage's rear entrance that Henry thought was secured. A voice cut through the tension with authority that made Derek's weapon arm drop slightly. "Nobody move. FBI. Derek Thompson, you're under arrest for conspiracy, industrial espionage, and accessory to murder. Henry Mitchell, you and the boys stay exactly where you are while we sort this out." 3 federal agents materialized from shadows Henry thought were empty, their weapons trained on Derek with professional precision. But as Henry's eyes adjusted, he recognized the lead agent, and his blood turned to ice. Because standing in his garage wearing an FBI badge was the same man who'd been photographed with Derek and Marcus Chin 3 years ago in that aerospace facility. The same man whose face appeared in Marcus Chin's witness_statements folder labeled as compromised for trust. The agent's eyes met Henry's, and his smile was cold and empty. "Thanks for doing exactly what we needed, Henry. The drive, please. This investigation is now concluded." John's whispered words barely reached Henry's ears, but they contained more terror than anything Derek had threatened. "That's not an FBI agent. That's the man who killed my mother." Henry's hand froze halfway to his holstered Glock as the implications of John's whispered warning crashed through his tactical calculations. The man wearing an FBI badge wasn't here to arrest Derek. He was here to eliminate witnesses. The 2 other agents flanking him weren't federal law enforcement either, just hired muscle with convincing costumes. Derek's momentary panic evaporated into relief. He lowered his weapon completely, stepping away from Henry. "About damn time, Vincent. I've been trying to contain this situation for hours. The kid's got his father's files." Vincent, the fake agent who'd murdered John's mother, kept his weapon trained on Henry while his cold eyes assessed the garage. "Marcus always said you were stubborn, Henry. Said you were the only one in this pathetic club who actually believed the brotherhood mythology. You killed her," John said, his voice shaking but steady. "You cut my mother's brake lines. My father's files have the proof. The chemical analysis, the timeline, everything." Vincent's expression didn't change, acknowledging the accusation with casual indifference. "Your mother made it impossible to let her live. She hired investigators, filed reports, contacted journalists. Some people don't understand when it's time to accept loss and move on." The 2 flanking gunmen shifted positions, creating crossfire angles that eliminated Henry's tactical options. This wasn't improvised. It was a professional execution being staged with precision. The drive, Vincent demanded, extending his free hand. And the phone. Last chance before this gets messy. Derek needs to maintain his position, which means your death has to look like self-defense or suicide. But John's hand moved inside his jacket with purposeful deliberation, and Henry caught the slight smile that flickered across the kid's face, completely incongruous with their circumstances. "You want the files?" John said, pulling out the USB drive and holding it up. "Everything my father documented. Every transaction, every communication, every piece of evidence." He paused, his smile widening despite tears streaming down his face. "Then you should know something my father taught me when I was 12 years old. Cloud backup. Automatic synchronization every 30 seconds to encrypted servers in 3 countries. I've been uploading everything since I plugged this drive into my phone 15 minutes ago, and the upload completed 2 minutes before you walked in." The garage fell silent except for rain hammering the roof. Derek's face went pale, his weapon hand trembling. Vincent's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You're bluffing," Vincent said. "A homeless kid with a burner phone doesn't have access to international server networks. A homeless kid whose father was Dr. Marcus Chun, aerospace engineer and paranoid genius who spent 3 years setting up failsafes, absolutely has that access," John corrected. His fingers moved across the phone screen, displaying active uploads to servers in Switzerland, Iceland, and Singapore. "My father taught me everything. Every password, every protocol, every contingency in case they came for me. Like and subscribe. These stories only continue if you're here with us." Henry saw Vincent's tactical calculus shift from simple execution to damage control. "Where did the files go? Give me the access credentials." "They went everywhere," John said quietly. "To federal prosecutors in 3 states. To journalists at the New York Times and Washington Post with instructions to publish if I don't check in every 6 hours. To the real FBI field office in San Francisco with detailed information about corrupt agents, including you, Vincent Cross. My father didn't just document crimes. He built a dead man switch that activates if I stop preventing it. The only way this ends quietly is if I stay alive." Derek's weapon clattered to the floor. "This is insane. We can pay you. 10 million, 20 million, whatever it takes." "My father is dead," John said flatly. "Whatever deal you claim, it's a lie. And my mother is dead because she wouldn't stop looking for him. Now you're all going to prison." Vincent's face hardened into something inhuman. "Then we have nothing left to lose. If the files are distributed, killing you becomes consequence-free." His weapon came back up, centered on John's chest. Henry moved without thinking, placing himself between Vincent's gun and John. The Glock appeared in his hand, but Vincent was faster. The garage erupted with gunfire, multiple weapons discharging simultaneously. Then different gunfire joined the chaos, precision shots from the garage's rear entrance. The flanking gunman went down hard. Derek dove for his fallen weapon, but a boot kicked it away. "Federal agents, actual ones this time." A woman's voice called out with authority. "Everyone on the ground now." Real FBI agents, at least 6 of them, flooded into the garage with tactical lights cutting through the smoke. Henry's legs gave out as adrenaline crash hit, but John caught him, the kid's hands steady. The woman who'd given orders crouched beside them, her badge legitimate. "Special Agent Sarah Morrison, FBI Organized Crime Division. We've been monitoring communications related to Marcus Chin's disappearance for 18 months. When your files hit our servers tonight, it gave us everything we needed. Derek Thompson, Vincent Cross, and 14 others, including your chapter president, are being arrested simultaneously right now." Morrison smiled at John. "Your father's insurance policy worked exactly as designed. And speaking of your father," she pulled out a tablet, showing a live video feed. An older Asian man appeared on screen, his face weathered but unmistakable. "John," Marcus Chin's voice came through the speakers, breaking with emotion. "I'm so sorry for everything. I had to disappear to protect you, but I never stopped watching. Never stopped planning for the day we'd be safe enough to reunite." John's hand trembled as he reached for the tablet, tears streaming freely now. "Dad?" You're really alive. I'm alive, son. And thanks to you and Henry, I can finally come home. The FBI has offered witness protection for both of us until the trials are complete. After that, Marcus smiled through his own tears. After that, we start over. Together this time. 3 months later, Henry stood in a small apartment in Portland, watching John and his father work on a legitimate engine design at a kitchen table covered in blueprints. The Hells Angels Oakland chapter had been dismantled, its leadership facing decades in federal prison. Henry's testimony had earned him immunity and a clean break from the life he'd spent 15 years building. You staying for dinner? Marcus asked, looking up from his calculations. John's been practicing his cooking. Fair warning, it's experimental. Henry smiled, feeling lighter than he had in years. The brotherhood he'd lost had been built on lies and violence. But this, a rescued kid and his father, building something honest together. This felt like the family he'd been searching for all along. Yeah, Henry said, settling into a chair. I'm staying. Outside, rain fell on Portland streets, washing everything clean.